The Great Iron Wall looms over the horizon like a scar upon the earth, its colossal ramparts stretching beyond sight, its bastions thick with the soot of 1,000 forges. The air is heavy with the weight of history, oil and iron, incense and sweat, the mingling scent of war and devotion. To the faithful, it is God's gift, the final bastion against the abyss. To the condemned, it is a prison, a monolith that seals them within a world shaped by war. Beyond the wall lies the unknown, the profane, the wretched remnants of those who fell to corruption. Beyond its towers, the heretics amass, their prayers twisted into blasphemies, their cities reshaped into mockeries of the faith. And so, for 8 centuries, the Sultanate has stood, bound to its purpose, to endure, to fight, to never relent. But within the wall, in the sprawling cities and silent villages, in the bustling markets and darkened alleys, the weight of war is borne by the people. To be born in the Sultanate is to be born into duty. The Great War has shaped not just the land, but the very fabric of existence. The people do not know a world without war. It has defined their parents, their ancestors, and it will claim their children. Some embrace it as a divine trial, a test of faith, of resilience. Others resent it, though they dare not say so aloud. The Sultanate's fortress cities are vast, labyrinthine, filled with both industry and devotion. Mosques rise beside foundries, their minarets casting long shadows over the streets where merchants sell war rations and weaponry in equal measure. Even within the safety of the walls, the sounds of war are ever present. The distant thunder of artillery drills, the sermons of war clerics, the rhythmic chanting of conscripts drilling in the courtyards of their barracks. The war is not just fought on battlefields, it is lived. It is worn, spoken, breathed. The children of the Sultanate are raised not on fables of peace, but on tales of sieges, of victories, of martyrs who bled so that the wall might stand another century. Boys and girls recite the martyrs' verses before they can even read. The older ones already train with weapons, learning to march long before they understand what it means to die. Some will go to war, some will build the weapons, some will pray for those who do not return. But no one escapes the burden. War demands more than soldiers. It requires hands to build, to harvest, to mend. Behind the legions, an empire of laborers toils under the weight of necessity. The peasantry, the artisans, the merchants, the scribes, they are all conscripts of another kind. The fields beyond the cities are not worked for profit, but for sustenance. Every grain of wheat is accounted for, every bushel taxed in blood. Peasants work under the watchful eye of the Sultan's scribes, their harvests measured not by wealth, but by the war effort's demands. A shortfall in production is not met with negotiation, it is met with conscription. The forges of the Sultanate never go cold. The foundries, manned by artisans and slaves alike, produce weapons, armor, artillery, and ammunition at an unceasing pace. The steel they make will go to the front lines, but they will never wield it themselves. To live in the Sultanate is to live under an unspoken rule. If you do not fight, you must serve. And even among those who do not march, death comes all the same, through exhaustion, through accidents in the factories, through the slow, creeping hunger that afflicts the lowest classes when the supply lines falter. The war is more than a conflict. It is a holy struggle, a battle for the soul of the world. And so, faith is not merely a belief in the Sultanate, it is the foundation upon which all things stand. The Imams preach of the duty of the faithful, of the glory of sacrifice. They speak of martyrs who walk beside the saints, of soldiers whose deaths are not ends, but beginnings. The sermons echo through the cities, through the mosques, through the barracks, prayer and war intertwined as one. But beneath the surface, there are whispers. There are those who have seen too much, who have prayed too often for salvation that never came. There are those who wonder if the war is truly a holy struggle or merely a cycle with no end. And there are those who, in secret, ask a question more dangerous than any heresy. What happens if we stop? Such thoughts are dangerous. Such thoughts are treason. The Iron Wall still stands. The Sultanate still endures, and the people within it wake, work, and pray as they always have, because there is no other choice. Even the lowest beggar, the most broken soldier, the weariest mother knows the truth that cannot be spoken aloud. If the wall falls, there will be no Sultanate, no home, no future, and so they endure. Because they must. The cities of the Sultanate are both sanctuaries and prisons, built upon the twin pillars of faith and war. Their minarets rise above sprawling streets, their marketplaces hum with the voices of merchants and beggars alike, and their foundries never cease their labor. To a foreigner, they might seem thriving, even grand, rich with culture, learning, and tradition. But for those who live within their walls, the truth is far more complex. Every stone, every brick, every street tells a story of war. Every structure, no matter how beautiful, serves a purpose. In Iskandaria, the great bazaar of 1,000 colors bustles with trade, yet nearly all goods, from spices to silks, are taxed in the name of the war effort. In Damascus, the golden domed mosques ring with prayers for victory, their floors worn smooth by the knees of soldiers seeking divine favor before their next campaign. And in Al-Qasr, the fortress city of the south, every man and woman is a conscript in waiting, their homes constructed with walls thick enough to withstand artillery barrages. To live in the cities of the Sultanate is to live in a world in motion, where faith and survival are inseparable, and where war is not merely fought, it is lived. The Sultanate's cities are labyrinths of stone, steel, and fire, divided into quarters dictated by wealth, labor, and faith. In the upper districts, the ruling class, the scholars, and the war priests dwell in towering palaces and white marble halls, their lives dictated by governance, theology, and war planning. Their existence is one of privilege, yet it is bound by the same chains as those below. The viziers and scholars may not carry rifles, but their weapons are doctrine, law, and prophecy. Their failures are measured in lives lost on the battlefield. Below them, in the merchant quarters, trade flourishes under the ever-watchful gaze of the Sultan's tax collectors. The streets are alive with sound, the cries of sellers hawking dried dates and fragrant spices, the clinking of gold exchanged for fine damask, the distant clang of forges hammering steel into weapons. Yet behind the wealth, there is desperation. The war demands its share, and those who cannot pay its toll in coin pay it in flesh, a son conscripted, a daughter sent to serve in the Sultan's great workshops. And beneath it all, in the workers' districts, the pulse of the city is strongest. Here, the streets are tangled and tight, crowded with families who live stacked upon one another, where homes double as workshops, and where the forge smoke turns the sky permanently grey. Life is grueling, unrelenting, and thankless. The war does not visit these streets, it owns them. It is in these districts where the truth of the Sultanate is felt most deeply, for the war is not just fought with weapons, it is fought with labour, with sweat, with exhaustion. And no one, no matter how poor, is free from its grasp. If war is the body of the Sultanate, faith is its soul. The call to prayer rings 5 times a day, echoing through the streets, reverberating against the towering walls. The faithful gather in great mosques, in small street corner prayer houses, even in the alleys where the poorest kneel upon rags. For many, prayer is not a choice, it is survival. To show devotion is to show loyalty to the cause. To question the war is to question God's will. In the great mosques of Damascus, the war priests preach of sacrifice, of martyrs who ascend to the heavens clad in fire and steel, of warriors who march not for land, but for salvation. Every soldier who leaves the city does so under the blessing of the imams, their weapons sanctified, their banners inscribed with verses of devotion. Yet, in the shadowed corners of the cities, there are those who whisper. There are those who wonder if this war has become something more than faith, something more than survival. There are those who pray, not for victory, but for something they do not dare speak aloud, an end. No city in the Sultanate is untouched by war. Even in the most peaceful courtyard, even in the smallest marketplace, the war demands its tithe. The forges burn day and night, their chimneys vomiting smoke into the sky. Weapons, armor, artillery, the lifeblood of the Sultanate's survival, are hammered into existence at a relentless pace. The blacksmiths who toil in these infernos do so under brutal conditions, their bodies scarred, burned, broken by years of relentless labor. The war does not just consume soldiers, it consumes workers. The mines beneath Al-Qasr run deep, their tunnels stretching for miles, manned by convicts, heretics, and the poorest of the poor, digging for the ores that fuel the Sultanate's war machine. Many who enter these tunnels will never see the sky again. For the war to continue, the cities must produce, and so they do, at any cost. At night, the cities do not sleep, the war does not permit it. In the barracks, soldiers train beneath the glow of lanterns, their chants filling the streets. In the factories, laborers toil beneath dim torchlight, their hands calloused, their faces hollow. There is no peace in the Sultanate. There is only preparation. The people of the cities know this truth well. To live within the walls is to be a part of the war, whether they will it or not. And so, they endure. Because what choice do they have? Faith in the Sultanate is not a quiet thing. It is not a personal journey, nor a contemplative meditation. It is not something carried lightly, held for comfort, or whispered in private prayers. Faith is duty. Faith is war. Faith is survival. To believe in the Sultanate is to believe in the struggle, to accept that war is not just necessary, but holy, that every battle fought beyond the iron wall is divinely ordained, and that to falter in conviction is to risk damnation. The Sultan himself is the protector of the faithful, his word backed not just by steel and fire, but by the mandate of heaven. To serve the Sultan is to serve God's will. This is the lesson taught in the mosques, engraved upon the banners of war, chanted in the marching songs of the Janissaries, and whispered in the final breaths of the dying. Yet for some, faith is not so easily held. For every man who marches with conviction, there is another who prays in desperation, pleading for the war to end. For every war priest who speaks of divine purpose, there is a mother who wonders if her son's death was truly necessary. For every soldier who dies a martyr, there is a beggar kneeling in the shadows of the mosque, unsure if God still listens. The burden of faith in the Sultanate is not just belief in war. It is the struggle to keep believing at all. The war priests of the Sultanate do not simply preach, they lead. They march beside the soldiers, stand upon the battlements, and walk among the wounded. Their sermons echo not only in the great mosques, but in the trenches, in the barracks, in the factories, where laborers toil until their hands break. They do not ask if the war is just. They ask only how best to fight it. In Iskandariya, the Grand Muftis sit in golden halls, debating scripture, issuing decrees, and reinforcing the belief that the war is an eternal duty, a divine test that must never be abandoned. They speak of martyrs who rise in glory, of the righteous who fall so that the faithful may live, and of the heresy of despair. For to doubt the war is to doubt God's plan. In the Sultan's court, the viziers listen carefully, their own power intertwined with the clerics who guide the people's faith. There is no separation between church and state. There cannot be. The war is both a political necessity and a spiritual imperative. But beyond the palaces, beyond the mosques, beyond the great sermons of the faithful, in the dark corners of the Sultanate's cities, there are those who no longer believe. Doubt is a dangerous thing in the Sultanate. It does not begin with grand acts of defiance or public declarations of heresy. It begins in whispers, in tired sighs, in small moments of hesitation. A father who wonders if his sons will ever return home. A soldier who, after years in the trenches, begins to question why the war never ends. A priest who watches the faithful kneel before the altar and wonders if their prayers are truly heard. Some doubts never escape the mind. They are buried, hidden beneath duty, drowned in devotion. But others cannot be silenced. There are those who stop attending prayer, their absence noticed but unspoken. There are those who begin to drink more than they should, who disappear into the back rooms of taverns, who linger too long in the company of poets and heretics. And then there are those who, in the dead of night, take their doubt too far. There are secret gatherings, hidden among the lowest quarters of the cities. There are men and women who speak of peace, who question the war, who ask if the Sultan is truly divinely guided. There are those who do not see an endless war of faith. They see a war that sustains the powerful while consuming the weak. The Inquisition calls these men apostates, traitors to the faith. The Sultan calls them enemies of the state. The war priests call them lost souls, condemned to hell before they even die. They have many names, but to the people, they are known only as the quiet dead. For none who speak against the war are ever seen again. For the ordinary citizen, faith is not just a belief, it is a necessity. To question, to doubt, to hesitate, is to risk everything. So they pray. Even if their hearts are empty, even if they do not believe, they kneel in the mosques, they whisper the names of the saints. They bless their children before sending them to war, not out of conviction, but because they must. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the sermons have ended and the streets have emptied, when the city is still and the fires of the forges have dimmed, the same thoughts return, unspoken, but ever present. What if we are wrong? What if the war never ends? What if God no longer listens? But these thoughts remain locked away, buried beneath the weight of duty. For in the Sultanate, faith is not a choice. It is a burden, it is a chain, and no one escapes it. The House of Wisdom stands as a monument to the mind, a fortress of scholars, alchemists, and mathematicians who seek to unravel the secrets of existence. Within its vast halls, the sciences of metallurgy, architecture, chemistry, and medicine are pushed to their furthest limits. The Sultanate survives not only by faith and steel, but by knowledge, and it is here, beneath domes adorned with celestial charts and within laboratories where vapors of strange colors rise, that the greatest minds of the era labor for the war effort. Yet knowledge in the Sultanate is a paradox. It is cherished and feared. It is the key to survival and the path to damnation. For though the House of Wisdom is a beacon of learning, it is also a place of dangerous truths. The scholars of the House of Wisdom do not ask if their research is moral, nor if it is right. They ask only if it will work. The war demands more than warriors. It demands innovation. New weapons, stronger armor, faster means of transport, deadlier tactics. The scholars labor not for curiosity, but for necessity. The alchemists toil over concoctions that can strengthen soldiers, make armor immune to flame, or dissolve flesh like boiling water. The architects study how to reinforce the iron wall, how to build cities that can withstand endless siege, how to construct labyrinthine defenses that swallow invaders whole. The physicians dissect the bodies of the dead, searching for ways to make men heal faster, fight longer, resist fatigue and pain. Everything learned, everything studied, everything pursued has one goal: to win the war. But not all knowledge is welcome. The House of Wisdom does not exist outside the gaze of the faith. The war priests and theologians walk its halls just as surely as the scholars, ensuring that knowledge never exceeds its rightful bounds. There are subjects that cannot be studied, experiments that cross into heresy, ideas that are deemed too dangerous to exist. Alchemy is permitted, but only within the laws of God. The creation of artificial life, of creatures not born of man and woman, is forbidden, though some whisper of hidden laboratories where such taboos have been broken. Medicine is encouraged, but there are rumors of scholars who have experimented on the living, seeking ways to make men endure wounds that should be fatal. The study of machines is tolerated, but only when it serves the war effort, for there are tales of devices so advanced, so unnatural, that they were destroyed before they could ever be used. To question too deeply, to invent too boldly, is to risk the wrath of the faith. To seek knowledge for its own sake, rather than for the war, is to invite suspicion, exile, or worse. Despite its grandeur, despite its image as a holy institution, the House of Wisdom is not a place of harmony. It is a battleground where scholars, war priests, and politicians struggle for control over the future. There are factions within factions, some devoted to pure knowledge, others seeking to harness science for power, and still others who are nothing more than spies for the Sultan's court. The Inquisition watches the house closely. ensuring that no heresy takes root. The scholars, in turn, hide their most dangerous ideas, locking them away in vaults, destroying their own notes, speaking in codes that only the worthy can decipher. And yet, despite the danger, despite the risk, there are always those who push forward. Because they know that if the Sultanate is to survive, it will not be through prayer alone. It will be through knowledge, even if it damns them. There is no discovery without sacrifice. The Sultanate owes its guns, its armor, its strategies, its fortifications to the men and women who have labored in secret, whose ideas have reshaped the war, whose names will never be known. Some have given their lives for progress. Others have disappeared when their research was deemed too dangerous to exist. But the war does not stop, and so the scholars do not stop. They refine, they innovate, they push forward, knowing that even if the faith condemns them, even if the Sultan forbids them, even if the Inquisition hunts them, without them, the war will be lost. The great bazaars of the Sultanate are a theatre of contradictions, where wealth and poverty stand side by side, where merchants whisper of fortunes made on the backs of dying men, and where the scent of roasted lamb mingles with the stench of smelting iron. Here, in the bustling heart of the cities, beneath domes of intricate tilework and among stalls draped in woven silks, life persists. Even in war, people must eat, they must trade, they must barter, they must haggle over the price of saffron, as if the world beyond the wall is not burning. But the war is here, even among the merchants, especially among the merchants. There is no economy untouched by it, no market unshackled from its demands, no trade unburdened by the iron weight of the Sultanate's survival. To walk through the bazaar is to see the war in motion, not just in the steel-tipped spears being sold to officers, nor in the battered coins exchanging hands for salted meat, but in every grain of wheat, every bolt of cloth, every desperate negotiation for survival. Everything in the Sultanate exists to feed the war machine. The merchants of Damascus and Iskandariya know this well. Their trade is not truly their own. It is dictated by the war effort, controlled by the ever-present gaze of the Sultan's tax collectors. Agriculture is not for the people, it is for the army. The harvests are counted, measured, taxed, and seized when the war demands it. What remains is left to the people, but in lean years, that is very little. Blacksmiths forge not for their families, but for the legions. The price of steel is dictated by the needs of the wall, and weapons are a government-controlled commodity. A farmer may need a blade to protect his land, but if the war demands it, he will be left with a wooden club instead. Merchants who wish to trade freely must navigate a labyrinth of restrictions. Spices, cloth, dyes. These luxuries are permitted, but only for those who can pay the war tithe. Even gold is often useless without the right political favor. The Sultanate is rich, and yet its people starve. The war does not create prosperity, it devours it. Yet even in wartime, there are those who thrive. Not every merchant suffers. Not every noble tightens their belt. Some grow fat off the war, profiting from the unending need for supplies, for manpower, for weapons. These men, the war profiteers, the suppliers, the ones who sell to both the army and the black market, walk the streets with gold upon their fingers, their robes made of the finest silk smuggled from distant lands. They deal in grain while peasants sell their daughters to afford a loaf of bread. They sell steel while blacksmiths in the labor districts burn their hands working the forges for a fraction of what the warlords pay. They trade information, knowing that whispers hold as much value as gold, that secrets are as deadly as swords. And yet, these men walk freely, because the war does not just require soldiers and scholars, it requires deal makers, hoarders, men willing to sell the Sultanate's own blood if it means winning another campaign. In another time, they would be condemned. In another war, they would be hanged for treason. But in this war, they are necessary. For every official trade, there is a deal done in the dark. The black market thrives in the Sultanate, a whispering underworld of desperate men, hidden warehouses, and smugglers who operate in the shadows of the faith. If the official economy cannot provide, the black market will. A farmer whose grain was seized by the army can buy it back, at twice the price. A widow, left with nothing after her sons were conscripted, can sell relics scavenged from battlefields, for a coin, for a meal, for a future. A deserter, hiding from the Sultan's enforcers, can purchase forged papers, if he is willing to pay in blood. Here, in the underbelly of the cities, gold flows freer than in the bazaars, but every deal carries a risk. To be caught trading in forbidden goods, to be discovered dealing in stolen military supplies, to be accused of hoarding what the war demands, this is death. Yet despite the risk, the black market endures. Because in a nation where the war takes everything, there must be another way to survive. In the poorest districts, war is measured not in battles fought, but in meals lost. The bakeries that once filled the streets with the smell of warm bread now serve only the soldiers first, the nobles second, the merchants third. And the common folk? They wait. They kneel before merchants begging for scraps. They trade their possessions, their jewelry, their furniture, their dignity for a single loaf. In some cities, the Sultan's officials distribute rations, carefully measured, carefully weighed. But the war effort demands much, and there is never enough for all. It is whispered that in the most desperate quarters, there are those who have turned to darker ways of feeding themselves. There are places where the poor disappear, where meat is sold without a name, where the war has not just taken food, it has taken humanity. These rumors are never spoken too loudly, because if they are true, then the war has already been lost. There is no true wealth in the Sultanate, not for the common man. There is only the illusion of prosperity, the promise that after the war, things will be better. But the war does not end. And so, the people trade, they sell what they must, they barter, they steal, they haggle, they hope, they survive even if they do not live. Because in the Sultanate, wealth is not measured in gold, it is measured in what you can still afford to lose. The Great Iron Wall is the beating heart of the Sultanate, its lifeline and its curse. It is a fortress without equal, a structure so vast that its towers disappear into the horizon, its foundations buried deeper than any enemy has ever dared to reach. It is the line between civilization and oblivion, a monument to defiance, a testament to the will of those who built it. And yet, for all its might, it is not a shield. It is a cage. To live within the Sultanate is to live beneath its shadow, to know that the wall does not just keep the horrors of the enemy out, it keeps the people in. It dictates the course of their lives, determines their fates. And for those who guard it, who toil upon it, who die upon it, the wall is not simply stone and steel. It is a graveyard waiting to be filled. For those who serve upon the Iron Wall, there is no rest. They are not like the legions who march beyond it, who are given the false mercy of battle, the illusion of a glorious death in the field. No, the wall's garrison is cursed with patience, with the slow rot of waiting for an attack that could come tomorrow, or in 10 years, or never at all. They stand upon the battlements, clad in thick armor to guard against the bitter winds, their hands calloused from gripping spears, muskets, and flame lances that may never be fired. The wall has stood for centuries. Their fathers stood where they stand now, and their sons will take their place when they are gone. Some say the wall is haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of history, by the unspoken truth that for all its strength, it will fall someday. No wall lasts forever. No empire stands eternal. The sentries do not speak of this. They do not dare. They watch the horizon, where dark clouds coil above cursed lands, where the ruins of fallen cities still smolder, where the enemy moves unseen, and they wait. Because when the wall falls, they will be the first to die. The wall is not just a barrier, it is a world unto itself. Along its length, fortress cities rise like fangs, manned by thousands, their gates guarded as fiercely as the capital itself. These are not places of comfort, nor are they places of peace. They are prisons, even for those who serve within them. The soldiers who call the wall their home know only duty. They train, they patrol, they listen to sermons from war priests who tell them that their suffering is holy, that their watchfulness is the reason the Sultanate still stands. Some believe this, others know better. For within these fortresses, there are no heroes, only men and women who have been stationed too long, whose minds erode like the stone beneath their feet. They stare at the abyss beyond the wall, knowing that it stares back. Madness is not uncommon here. Neither is desertion. Those who abandon their post are hunted down by the Inquisition, dragged back to the fortress to be made an example of. Their bodies are displayed at the gates, their sins carved into their flesh so that others may read them and remember. And yet, for all this, the wall holds. For now. Beneath the wall, there are tunnels. Some were built by the Sultanate, escape routes, supply passages, ancient vaults where forgotten relics are kept. But others were dug from the outside in. The heretics and their creatures do not always assault the wall directly. They burrow, they infest, they rot the foundation like worms in wood. And so, the sappers are sent into the deep places beneath the wall, armed with flame, poison, and steel. They fight battles in absolute darkness, where the air is thick with dust and the walls shake with the sounds of distant bombardments. They burn what should not exist, seal tunnels that should not have been found, and pray that they do not dig too deep. Some of these tunnels are collapsed, some are left open. Not all the horrors that lurk beneath the wall come from outside. For all its might, the Iron Wall is not infallible. It has withstood invasions, bombardments, earthquakes, and time itself. It has repelled demons, heretics, and things whose names have been stricken from history. But even stone grows weak. Even iron rusts. The Sultanate pours its greatest efforts into maintaining the wall, but the cracks are there. Some are hidden beneath layers of reinforced steel and prayers, others are disguised by paint and plaster. But those who have stood upon the battlements long enough feel it. And in the dark corners of the Sultan's court, among the war priests who whisper to one another in hushed tones, among the scholars of the House of Wisdom who study the ancient records, there is one truth they do not say aloud. One day, the wall will fall, and when it does, nothing will stop what comes next. For now, the Iron Wall stands. For now, the people live beneath its shadow, believing that as long as it endures, they are safe. But safety is a lie. And deep in their hearts, the people of the Sultanate know this. Nothing lasts forever. Not even walls. The fields of the Sultanate are vast and unyielding, stretching between fortress cities and broken lands like veins feeding the body of a dying man. They are golden with wheat, thick with barley, green with olive trees that have stood for centuries, their roots deeper than the war itself. But these are not lands of peace. They do not belong to the farmers who tend them. They do not serve the people who break their backs beneath the sun. They do not exist for prosperity or trade. They exist for the war. To live in the villages of the Sultanate is to live beneath a constant shadow, knowing that everything you reap, everything you grow, everything you produce belongs not to you, not to your children, but to the Sultanate's unceasing hunger. And when the harvest fails, when the taxes rise, when the demands of war become greater than the land can bear, it is not the generals, nor the merchants, nor the nobles who suffer. It is the farmers who starve first. The land is both sacred and cursed. It is whispered that some of these fields were once battlefields, that the wheat grows tall because it has been fed with blood. It is said that some wells run red in the spring, that the bones of warriors long dead are unearthed by the plough, that the very soil itself remembers the war. For centuries, the peasants have toiled in these fields, knowing that their work is not for themselves, but for the armies beyond the wall. They wake before dawn, kneeling in prayer before touching the soil, for to grow food in a land of war is as holy as taking up the sword. They are told that their labor is a divine duty, that every grain of wheat, every loaf of bread, every drop of oil is an offering to the Sultanate's righteous cause. And they believe it, because to believe otherwise is to invite despair. When the war demands more, the Sultanate takes more. The tax collectors ride into the villages on horseback, their robes adorned with the insignia of the war ministries, their ledgers already filled with the names of those who owe, those who have, those who must give more. They do not come to negotiate, they come to take. A portion of every harvest is already owed to the Sultanate. But when the war effort falters, when the armies require more rations, when the blacksmiths need more charcoal, more iron, more hands to work the forges, the burden falls upon the villages. Those who cannot meet the quota offer their livestock. Those who have no livestock offer their sons. And those who have nothing left to give disappear in the night, dragged away by the Sultan's enforcers to serve in the labor camps of the foundries, or worse, the mines beneath Al-Qasr, where the air is thick with choking dust and men die with pickaxes in their hands. To resist is to be branded a traitor, and traitors are not given the mercy of exile. The greatest enemy of the villages is not just hunger, not just the taxman, not just the war itself. It is those who prey upon them. Beyond the great cities, beyond the roads patrolled by the Sultan's guards, there are villages that no longer bow to the Sultanate. These places are not faithless, nor are they heretical. They are simply forgotten. The war has drained them, taken their sons, taken their food, taken their strength. And so they turn to banditry. They raid the caravans, steal from their neighbors, strike in the dead of night to claim grain, livestock, even children. They are not led by warlords, nor by generals. They are led by the desperate, by men who once worked the land, but now only know how to take. The Sultan's soldiers march into the borderlands to crush these outlaws, to burn their villages, to remind them that the war does not tolerate those who do not contribute. But the soldiers are few and the villages are many, and so the raids continue. For even the loyal must eat. The fields of the Sultanate are fertile, but never peaceful. Even the most isolated farmsteads fear the call of the levy, the sound of hooves in the distance, the arrival of soldiers who have come to claim what is owed. The peasants do not dream of wealth, nor of freedom. They dream only of a season where they may keep what they have grown. A year where the war does not take everything from them. But that year never comes. Because the war never ends. The Sultanate is a machine, and its people are the gears that keep it turning. The villages will continue to plant. The fields will continue to grow. The taxmen will continue to take. The soldiers will continue to march. And the war will continue to devour all until there is nothing left to reap. Until there is no one left to till the soil. Until the land itself is nothing more than ash and memory. The war does not spare women. The Sultanate speaks of them in hushed reverence, honoring them as mothers of warriors, caretakers of the faithful, pillars of the home. But words mean little in a world where men are conscripted, villages are emptied, and the burden of survival falls upon those left behind. Women are expected to endure, to mend the wounds of war, to raise the next generation of soldiers, to take up the labor that the dead can no longer perform. Some do as they are told. Others carve out power where none was meant to exist. And some, unwilling to wait for death to come to them, march to meet it instead. The war does not ask permission before taking husbands, sons, fathers, brothers. A woman in the Sultanate learns early that her love is not hers to keep. It is to be given to the state, to the Sultan, to the war. She marries knowing that her husband may not return, that her sons will be claimed before they reach manhood, that even if her family survives, it will not be whole. For many, faith is their only solace. The mosques are filled with women praying not for peace, but for survival, for their husbands to come back with their limbs intact, for their sons to be stationed in garrisons rather than sent beyond the wall. The widows are not granted time to mourn. They must work, must run their husband's shop, must reap the fields in his place, must fight off the taxmen when they come for what is owed. Some are left destitute, their homes claimed by the war economy, their children sent to labor camps where they will never again know the softness of a mother's embrace. And yet, in the silence of their grief, some find power. A woman who has lost everything is a woman who has nothing left to fear. And those women do not beg. They command. In the streets of Iskandariya, in the trade districts of Damascus, in the black markets where the war is fought with coin instead of steel, there are names that never appear in official records. But they are spoken with respect and with fear. They belong to women. The merchant mothers who have outlived their husbands and now control trade routes that span the Sultanate. The financiers who loan coin to warlords, knowing that debt is as strong as any blade. The black market queens who deal in contraband, in relics smuggled from the front lines, in secrets whispered by dying men. They are not recognized by the court. They do not sit beside the viziers. Their influence is not officially acknowledged. And yet, a general who does not respect their reach will find his soldiers unfed, his supply lines cut, his war chest empty. They do not ask for power. They own it. In the court of the Sultan, behind the veils of noble houses, among the scholars of the House of Wisdom, there is another truth. Women are not absent from power. They simply do not wield it where men can see. For every vizier who commands an army, there is a wife, a mother, a sister who advises him. For every warlord who controls a city, there is a daughter who ensures his rule is not contested. For every scholar who makes great discoveries, there is a woman who holds the key to the knowledge he lacks. Some laugh at this, dismissing them as mere advisors, as mere wives, mothers, daughters. Those men do not last long. For power does not need a throne. It does not need a sword. It does not need a name written in the histories. It only needs the will to endure. The Sultanate does not celebrate its women as warriors, as leaders, as rulers. But it does not need to. They have always existed. They have always endured. And when the war takes everything, when the walls begin to crack, when the men have died and the generals have fallen, it will not be the warriors who remain. It will be the women, and they will rebuild the world. Not all who live in the Sultanate are counted among the faithful. Not all who serve beneath its banners are remembered. Some live in the spaces between, too poor to be worth protecting, too broken to be of use, too stubborn to die. They are the ones who do not belong, the ones the war has left behind, discarded, forgotten. The Sultanate does not acknowledge them in its records, does not inscribe their names on its monuments. The war priests do not bless them. The taxmen do not bother counting them. But they exist. They scavenge in the shadows of the great cities. They haunt the roads between villages. They live in the ruins where others dare not tread. They are the orphans, the outcasts, the war-damned. And though they have no place in the Sultanate, they are as much a part of it as the soldiers who march and the farmers who toil. Because no empire, no matter how mighty, is built only on its warriors. It is also built on those it has chosen to forget. There is no shortage of orphans in the Sultanate. The war devours families like fire consumes dry fields. Some are left behind when their fathers are slain beyond the wall, when their mothers die in childbirth, when famine and disease take what swords do not. They are too young to fight, too insignificant to be useful, too many to save. Some are gathered into the orphanages run by the war priests, where they are taught to pray for the fathers they will never meet and prepare for the war they will one day serve. They are trained for the labor camps, for the foundries, for the factories. Their futures are written before they can even spell their own names. Others are not so lucky. They roam the streets, feral, starving, half mad from hunger and grief. They steal what they must, hide in the alleyways, form packs in the underbelly of the great cities. They learn the lessons of survival far earlier than they should, that kindness is weakness, that the strong take and the weak suffer, that in a world where everyone is hungry, no one is coming to save them. And then there are those who do not make it at all. The ones who disappear into the night, taken by slavers, by warlords, by the desperate who see in them a commodity rather than a child. No one speaks of them, no one searches for them. Because in a land ruled by war, orphans are just another kind of casualty. Not all who are forgotten were born that way. Some were cast aside, some were driven out, some simply failed to fit within the Sultanate's rigid world. There are many ways to become an outcast. A soldier who abandons his post, unable to bear the weight of another campaign, marked as a deserter, hunted like a dog. A scholar whose discoveries veered too close to heresy, who fled before the war priests could silence him. A widow who refused to remarry, who turned to crime rather than accept her fate as another man's property. A failed merchant, ruined by bad deals and worse debts, left to rot in the gutters of the city. Some are exiles by decree, their crimes declared before the people, their fate sealed with ink and wax. Others are simply discarded in silence, their existence erased, their absence unnoticed. And some leave by choice. Because in the Sultanate, to live without purpose is to be nothing at all. And some would rather vanish into the wilderness than remain as nothing. There are wounds the war cannot heal. There are men who return from the front hollow, broken, less than human. The Sultanate does not have a name for them. It does not acknowledge their suffering. There is no place in its scriptures for those who have given everything, only to return with nothing left inside them. The soldiers who cannot sleep without screaming, who flinch at the sound of bells, who wake with their hands wrapped around the throat of the nearest person. The war priests who have lost their faith, who stand before the altar but feel only emptiness, who recite the martyrs' verses with no belief in their hearts. The engineers and alchemists who have seen what war does to flesh, who have built weapons that turned men to ash, who have created things that should not exist. These men do not return to their homes. They drift. They drink. They vanish into the streets, or the wastes, or the quiet corners of the Sultanate where no one will ask them what they have seen. Some turn to crime, some join the outcasts, some become mercenaries, willing to kill for anyone who will feed them, and some simply walk into the desert one day and never come back. Because they know what the people of the Sultanate pretend not to understand. Not everyone who survives the war truly escapes it. The Sultanate does not see them. It does not count them. It does not mourn them. But they are there, in the alleys, in the ruins, in the silence between battles. They are the ones who have been left behind, abandoned, erased. And though the war does not need them, though the faith does not remember them, though the Sultan does not care for them, they endure. Because to be forgotten does not mean to be gone. Not yet. Not today. There is no true healing in the Sultanate. There is only patchwork survival. Only the desperate attempt to keep men standing long enough to send them back into the fire. The war does not permit weakness. It does not grant rest. A soldier who cannot fight is a burden. A wound that cannot be treated is a death sentence. And so the healers of the Sultanate do what they must. They mend flesh with unsteady hands. They cauterize wounds with hot iron and whispered prayers. They stitch torn bodies back together, knowing that the men they save will soon be broken again. They are not miracle workers. They are not saints. They are the last mercy a dying man will ever know. And even then, it is often no mercy at all. On the front lines, healing is not a profession. It is an act of desperation. The battlefield surgeons work in tents, thick with the scent of blood, rot, and alchemical smoke, their hands slick with the remnants of men who did not survive the last battle. They are given little: knives, saws, cauterizing irons, and whatever alchemical tinctures can dull the pain without killing the patient outright. Their work is brutal, fast, necessary. A shattered arm is removed, not repaired. There is no time to mend broken bones when the next attack is already underway. A gut wound is a death sentence. Those who suffer it are given the strongest opiates, not in hope of saving them, but to ensure they die without screaming. A severed limb means a half-life at best. The lucky ones are given crude prosthetics of wood and steel, barely functional, but enough to make them useful in the foundries or labor camps. For every man who leaves the surgeon's tent alive, there are 5 who never walk out at all. But the war does not stop, and so, the surgeons do not stop. Even if every man they save is already damned to die another day. The House of Wisdom does not limit itself to mortal medicine. There are those among the scholars who believe that the body is a tool to be shaped, modified, reforged like steel. They do not see flesh as sacred, nor do they believe in the natural limits of healing. They believe in experimentation. Some of their creations are celebrated: alchemical tonics that numb pain without clouding the mind, salves that can stop the rot of infection before it spreads, stimulants that can keep a man fighting even when his body should have failed him. But there are other things. Whispers of men who returned from war with bodies that were no longer their own. Rumors of soldiers who no longer sleep, who no longer feel pain, who no longer remember their own names. Legends of warriors whose limbs have been replaced, whose flesh has been reshaped, whose eyes no longer belong to them. The war priests are wary of these practices. The faith teaches that the body is given by God, that to alter it beyond necessity is to risk corruption. But the Sultanate does not refuse a weapon simply because it is unnatural. And so, the experiments continue. Because if a man can still fight, can still serve, can still kill, does it truly matter what he has become? Not all wounds can be seen. Not all wounds can be healed. There are men who return from war unmarked in body, but ruined in soul. They walk the streets of the Sultanate like living ghosts, staring at the world through eyes that have seen too much. They flinch at the sound of bells, mistaking them for war drums. They wake in the night, hands wrapped around the throats of loved ones, fighting enemies that are no longer there. They pray, but they no longer know who they are praying to. The faith has no place for the broken, no words for the ones who have given everything and lost themselves in return. They are pitied, but they are not kept. Some take their own lives. Some disappear into the desert, seeking an end beneath the burning sun. Some are sent to the labor camps, where their bodies might still serve the war, even if their minds are already gone. And some are sent back to the front, because a man who fears nothing, who feels nothing, who no longer understands pain, that is a weapon. And the Sultanate does not waste weapons. There are no true healers in the Sultanate. Only those who prolong suffering, only those who delay the inevitable, only those who mend bodies just enough for them to be broken again. There is no place for peace, no time for rest. There is only war, there is only the need to fight another day. And so, the healers work. The alchemists experiment. The surgeons cut and cauterize. Because in the Sultanate, there is only one truth. You are only worth saving if you can still serve the war. The war has lasted for centuries. The Sultanate has bled for generations. Sons die where their fathers once stood, and their sons will follow after them. Some call it fate, some call it duty, but for others, it is not enough. Not everyone in the Sultanate fights because they believe. Not everyone toils in the foundries, marches to the front, kneels in the mosques, simply because they accept the world as it is. There are those who search for something more. Some believe that if they walk far enough, they will find answers. That if they pray long enough, God will answer. That if they suffer enough, the war will end. These are the pilgrims, the seekers, the wanderers of the Sultanate. They are those who look beyond the battlefield, beyond the iron wall, beyond the sermons of the war priests. They are those who ask questions that have no answers, and sometimes they do not return. The Sultanate is vast, and its roads are old. Some were built before the war began, when the world was still whole, when trade was more than just an extension of war. Others were carved out of necessity, made by the feet of generations of pilgrims traveling from city to city, shrine to shrine, seeking wisdom, forgiveness, redemption. Some roads lead to holy places, sanctuaries of faith where the devout gather in hope of finding clarity. Some lead to ruins, places where prophets once walked, where battles once raged, where only echoes of the past remain. But some lead to nowhere at all, and yet still they walk. The pilgrims of the Sultanate are not warriors. They do not carry swords. They do not march in ranks. They are farmers who have lost their fields, widows who have nothing left to pray for, soldiers who have seen too much and wish to see something else. Some believe that if they make the journey to the oldest shrines, if they whisper their prayers into the wind, if they offer enough of themselves, they will find what they are looking for. And some simply walk until they collapse, because dying on the road is better than waiting for death to find them elsewhere. Not all who seek answers do so in silence. Some claim they have already found them. There have always been prophets in the Sultanate, men and women who speak with conviction, who claim that God has revealed to them a greater truth. Some are sanctioned by the war priests, their teachings accepted into the fabric of faith. Others are deemed heretics, madmen who seek to twist the word of God into something blasphemous. But there is always an audience for those who claim to know why the war does not end. Some say that the war is a punishment, that the Sultanate has sinned, that only through true repentance can the bloodshed cease. Some say that the war must be fought until the very end of time, that it is not a trial, but a condition of existence itself. Some whisper that the war is a lie, that it continues because the Sultan wills it so, because there are those who profit from suffering and have no desire to see it end. Those who speak too loudly are silenced, but even in death, their words linger. And sometimes they are spoken again. Not all who seek are driven by faith. There are those who travel beyond the cities not for redemption, but for understanding. The scholars of the House of Wisdom have long sent their own seekers into the ruins of the old world, hoping to recover fragments of forgotten knowledge. They search for ancient texts, lost artifacts, machines that have outlived their creators. Some seek weapons, desperate for anything that might turn the tide of war. Some seek wisdom, hoping that buried beneath the sands, hidden in the bones of forgotten cities, there is an answer to the questions the war priests refuse to ask. And some seek forbidden truths, things that should have stayed buried, things that the Inquisition would burn them for knowing. Not all who leave the Sultanate in search of knowledge return, and those who do often wish they had not. For centuries, men have wandered into the wastes beyond the Sultanate's borders, believing that somewhere, beyond the reach of the wall, beyond the reach of war, there is peace. They do not find peace. The desert is a graveyard of those who sought a world beyond war and found only silence. Some are killed by bandits, some are claimed by the elements, some disappear into the ruins of old cities, lost forever in the labyrinths of the past, and some return with stories that should not be possible. Of places where the laws of the world no longer hold, where time moves strangely, where shadows walk without men to cast them. Of cities that should have been reduced to rubble, still standing, still inhabited by those who should be long dead. Of voices that whisper in dreams, calling the lost deeper into the sands, promising answers that should not be known. Most who return are dismissed as madmen, but not all. And so, the seekers continue to walk. Because what if it is true? What if, beyond the war, beyond the bloodshed, beyond the wall, there is something else? Something waiting to be found? Something waiting to be understood? The Sultanate is a nation of war. It has no place for those who refuse to fight, who refuse to work, who refuse to serve. And yet, there will always be those who cannot accept this world as it is, who search for meaning where none is given. They walk the old roads. They pray in abandoned shrines. They whisper secrets in the ruins of forgotten cities. They seek answers that the war cannot give. And though many will die before they find them, still, they walk. Because they must. Because if there is no meaning, no purpose, no end to the war, then what is left? What else is there to hope for? What else is there to believe in? For 800 years the Sultanate has endured. The Iron Wall has withstood 1,000 sieges. Its defenders have bled for its stones. Its cannons have roared in defiance of oblivion. But nothing lasts forever. Not walls, not empires, not even faith. The Sultanate speaks of eternity, of divine purpose, of a war that must be fought until the end of time itself. It is carved into the sermons of the war priests, etched into the laws of the viziers, whispered in the prayers of the dying. And yet beneath the surface, beneath the stone of the fortresses and the steel of the cannons, beneath the faith of the people and the iron rule of the Sultan, there is a truth that none dare speak aloud. The wall will fall, and when it does, the Sultanate will either rise to meet its fate, or be consumed by it. No wall stands forever. Even the iron wall, built by the hands of generations, reinforced with blood and faith, watched over by the best minds of the House of Wisdom, is not immune to time. There are cracks in its stones, not always visible, not always spoken of, but felt in the bones of those who have manned its battlements for too long. The oldest fortresses along the wall are crumbling, their stones worn by centuries of wind, rain, and siege. The tunnels beneath the wall, once sealed, have begun to shift, their forgotten depths stirring with movements no one dares investigate. The supply lines grow thin, the resources that keep the garrisons fed and armed stretching further than they were ever meant to. The war has drained the Sultanate for generations. The burden does not lessen, the demands do not ease, and the cracks, both in the stone and in the people who defend it, grow wider each year. The Sultanate stands not only on stone and steel, but on order. The Sultan's word is law. The war priests dictate the righteous course. The generals ensure the wall does not falter. The scholars of the House of Wisdom provide the tools of survival. But behind closed doors, behind veils of silk and whispers, power shifts. The Sultan is but one man, and around him there are those who seek more. The viziers, who see the war as a machine to be managed, who question if the Iron Wall must be the Sultanate's only purpose. The war priests, who preach that doubt is heresy, that any talk of ending the war is a betrayal of God's will. The The scholars, who fear that the war has drained the empire beyond repair, who whisper of solutions that the faith will never allow. The generals, who know the truth before anyone else, that the wall will not stand forever, and that when it falls, there will be no reinforcements, no retreat, no second chances. There are rumors of quiet betrayals, of officials who sell secrets to the black markets, of assassinations hidden beneath the guise of religious purges. There are cities that grow restless, where the people look at the war not with devotion, but exhaustion. And in the deepest chambers of the Sultan's palace, there are whispers, not of surrender, not of peace, but of change, of what must be done before it is too late. Beyond the wall, the enemy waits. They have waited for centuries. They have tested the wall, pushed its limits, sent armies to shatter its foundations. They have failed, but they have not stopped. And even now, beyond the smoke-choked skies, beyond the corpse-laden trenches, beyond the wastelands where faith and heresy clash, they are watching. They see the cracks in the wall. They hear the whispers of weakness. They know that the Sultanate is not as strong as it once was. And when the time comes, they will strike harder than ever before. The people of the Sultanate do not speak of the wall falling. To say it aloud is heresy. It is defeat. It is the death of hope. But they feel it. The soldiers feel it when they stare across the battlefield, knowing that the next war may not be won. The farmers feel it when they watch their harvest shrink, when the taxmen demand more than they can give. The scholars feel it when they run their hands over the oldest records and realize that the Sultanate is following the same path as every empire that has fallen before it. The question is no longer if the wall will hold. The question is, what will happen when it falls? Will the Sultanate find another way to survive? Or will it be buried beneath the weight of its own history? Will it stand as the last bastion of faith? Or as the final empire to fall into darkness? Time will answer. And time is running out. The Sultanate stands at the edge of a knife. The iron wall still looms over the horizon, still divides the world between civilization and the abyss, still holds back the tide that has threatened to drown it for 8 centuries. The war priests still preach of divine duty. The legions still march beyond the gates. The cannons still thunder in the name of faith and survival. And yet beneath the surface, something has changed. The people feel it, even if they do not speak of it. The war has always been endless, but never before has it felt unwinnable. The wall has always been unbreakable, but never before have the cracks seemed so deep. The faith has always been absolute. But now, there is doubt. The Sultanate does not acknowledge it, does not allow such thoughts to take root. The laws remain firm, the sermons grow louder, the executions of heretics become more public. But doubt does not need permission to exist. And when an empire begins to question itself, it is only a matter of time before that question demands an answer. The Sultanate has always told its people that it is eternal, that it was forged by divine decree, that its mission is righteous, endless, unshakable. And for centuries, the people believed. But eternity is a fragile thing. The empire is stretched thin. Its soldiers are weary. Its fields are not as full as they once were. Its cities, once beacons of power, are now monuments to a war that has outlasted the men who first waged it. The Sultanate is mighty, but it is not invincible. And the people are beginning to wonder if they have been fighting for so long that they no longer remember why. There are 2 wars in the Sultanate. The first is the war beyond the wall, the war against the heretics, the war of swords and fire, of sieges and martyrdom. The second war is the one within. The war between those who still believe and those who do not. The war between those who want to keep fighting and those who are ready to stop. The war between those who cling to the old ways and those who see change as the only path forward. It is not a war fought with cannons or cavalry. It is fought in whispers, in backroom deals, in the silent spaces between prayers. It is fought in the looks exchanged between viziers when they speak of the war's cost. It is fought in the quiet hesitation of soldiers who do not charge as fiercely as they once did. It is fought in the murmurs of scholars who have read too much history to believe the Sultanate is immune to time. And it is fought in the hearts of the people who wake every morning wondering if this is the day the war finally comes to their door. The Sultanate has always taught that its fate is written, that the war is meant to be fought until the end of time, that to surrender is to invite damnation. But history does not care for what men believe. Empires rise, empires fall. The Iron Wall has stood for 8 centuries. Perhaps it will stand for 8 more. Perhaps it will fall tomorrow. Perhaps the Sultanate will endure, adapt, find a way to change without breaking. Or perhaps, like the civilizations that came before it will crumble under the weight of its own past, its own faith, its own refusal to let go of a war that has long since lost meaning. The truth is, no one knows. Not the war priests who still preach of eternal struggle, not the generals who still march to the battlefield, not the scholars who still search for an answer that may not exist, and not the people who live, suffer, pray, and die, waiting for an ending that may never come. What happens to a nation that only knows war? What happens when the people no longer remember how to live without it? What happens when the wall, after centuries of standing, finally comes crashing down? The Sultanate does not ask these questions, but someday it will have to answer them. And when that day comes, the fate of everything will be decided. The Sultanate still stands. The Iron Wall still holds, for now, but nothing lasts forever. Not war, not faith, not even the greatest empire the world has ever known. And so the story continues until the day it ends.